Hey people, this is TN Politics with Maya, and I'm Maya. Nice to see you again. As you know, every week we have different leaders and representatives of the bubble and representatives of the nowadays modern leadership to have a deep dive into power and empowerment, leadership and management. So all of those huge topics we'll discuss today with Maria Nyman, and I'm very happy that you're with us, the Secretary General of Caritas Europe. Welcome, Maria.
Thank you, Maya. Very happy to be here.
Well, it's let's start from the start. So this conversation, I have a concept to go around the link between to be in the EU bubble and to have this overview of everything happening in Europe, but in the same time to work with a network of grassroots activists on the actual line of problem solving when it comes to social challenges. So before going into that, I want to know more about your path. How did you end up here in Brussels in your position?
In Brussels, I guess the answer is quite simple. My husband is Belgian. I met him when I was an au pair many years ago, 25 years ago, something like that. And then I did my studies in Sweden. So I'm Swedish. I did law. And I did, my wish at the time was actually to work with something quite similar that I'm doing in the end. But I had never thought of Caritas at the time. I was more focusing on international relations, on human rights. But then as I met my husband and we decided to, get serious, I thought, probably I should also study a bit of EU law to open the perspectives for Brussels. So, that's one part of the story. I guess the other one, and which kind of, there have been small pieces of a puzzle that kind of
it's never
made it come together. Exactly. But my younger brother is a person with disabilities. And I think very early on from my childhood, I saw many of the injustices that he was facing, a lot of the discrimination, the kind of prejudices existing in society. And I think, very early on, there was a sense of social injustice and the need for social justice that was born in me. And I somehow wanted to contribute to that. I was thinking a lot about human rights and, thinking of myself in that field. Then when I saw this position for Caritas coming up, it had been a way for me because I had been starting in Brussels working for an organization defending and promoting the rights of people with disabilities. So that was the European Disability Forum. Then I became the director of one of their member organizations, Mental Health Europe. And then when I saw this opportunity at Caritas coming up, it felt like it kind of matched so much of what I had been wanting to get towards and what I had been somehow dreaming of from the outset. Working in an international environment because Caritas, I work for Caritas Europa, but we are part of an international confederation. And so also working a little bit broader than the social inclusion and the human rights from a European perspective, but also the humanitarian response, the international cooperation. And then I had been volunteering in Caritas when I was a student in my hometown in Sweden. And it just felt like, this is my place, kind of, really feels still the same way.
It sounds like a good match coming from many different perspectives. And
it feels like, yeah.
I've always noticed that when people who end up somehow in advocacy and had a relative with a disability or any kind of condition that really somehow shaped their understanding of what policies are missing, they always have a different motivation to be in the field.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I have many motivations, and where I'm right now, it feels as a quite, challenging opportunity and difficult in many ways, but also really a place where you can somehow be part of a change that needs to happen.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of the place where you are right now, I always find it very interesting to ask people to describe, people who are directors, secretary generals of these huge networks, to actually describe what a work day for them is. Because I think that many times people really cannot imagine the diversity and the dynamics of, being a director and a secretary general sounds very fancy. You tell people what to do. But then on the other hand, it's you do a lot of different things, you mix different operations. So how can you describe a day as a Secretary General of Caritas Europa?
Yeah, there is not one day that is the same as another day, right? It's the organization is composed of the Caritases in 46 countries in Europe. So it's really the wider Europe and a huge network. So part of the work is obviously to be in relations with these Caritases on an everyday basis, some of them in one way or the other. So the relations with the Caritases around Europe, listening into them, working also on projects together with them. I can expand on that more later. So that's one aspect of the work. The other is, of course, the everyday management of the office. We are an organization of 17 employees right now. So everything that comes with running of an office, be it the more tedious stuff like preparing of the work program, reporting, the monitoring, the evaluation, the meetings with the team, the kind of keeping up the motivation, try to support as much as I can. And then there's, of course, the external dimension, working with the policymakers, working with external partners, other civil society organizations, and then also the international work. So I work a lot with our office at an international level in Rome and with the other regional secretariat, as we call them, because on every continent, basically, there is like a regional office. So I'm responsible for the European one, and then there are others. And we try to also keep a link between ourselves. So it's everything, Maya. I mean, it's so difficult to explain in a simple way how a day looks like. There's a lot of meetings. There is a lot of time in front of the computer dealing with emails and stuff, but there's also a whole lot of human interactions. And I really, I'm grateful for Caritas for that as well, because the human relations are very important. And I try as much as I can to visit the Caritases at the national level, see their projects, see their realities, the realities of the people that that also need Caritas, get support from Caritas. So and that's probably the richest part, the meetings with the people, and seeing their realities, and also seeing all the beautiful work that's going on around there, thanks to Caritas.
Is that your most favorite part about the job?
Meeting with the people, yes. I mean, yes, because I think that's where I really every time get comforted about the fact that Caritas makes a difference in the lives of people. I mean, that's the most common sense I get when I visit projects and so on. And then, of course, working with colleagues, be it in other organizations, be it in my own organization, I have a really, I'm very lucky to have very good colleagues. And so every day is somehow a joy. And I keep feeling that it is a joy, despite the fact that the situation of the world is not so joyful. No? So, and that's what I like as well, to get a sense that, we're actually contributing to something valuable, something that, makes me remain hopeful, that, small changes, small contributions into the lives of people, and that go through very difficult situations often, because that's what Caritas is doing. Yeah.
To me, that would always be the first association I have when I hear Caritas is actually like literal people supporting other people in need. That is my very simple understanding, of course, of what a Caritas branch would do. But can you maybe give us different examples of what exactly the work is of Caritas?
I think your description is quite accurate, because it is, we really try to ensure that it's always a support person to person. Like, it's not, the donor and the beneficiary, or the service provider and the service user. It's always a person to person relation. And that's, that's kind of the part of the idea of Caritas is to ensure that we work in this way. So I said that we are a confederation. So basically, it's a network of organizations with the same values, with similar, same overall mission. But how we implement that mission in practice, that depends quite a lot. So it's really an organization that is present at the grassroots level, so the local level, in the communities with the people, and the the work that they are doing depends on the needs and the situation and the context in that local situation or national situation if it's a national Caritas. So it's everything from providing social services to people who are homeless, to migrants. There's a whole lot of work with migrants, with asylum seekers, working with people with disabilities, with women, with elderly people. It's always about supporting the people that in that context are in the most excluded, vulnerable, poor situations, Roma people. But then there's also the whole international components. There's a lot about international cooperation. So, and there it all depends on the country that Caritas is working with, because there's also that, not only direct service support, but there's also that support to Caritas overseas or to communities overseas. And then there's the humanitarian response, which is it's not all of the Caritases that are doing humanitarian response, but most of them would somehow be engaged either by directly supporting in an emergency situation or by doing fundraising to support another Caritas doing humanitarian support. So it's everything from emergency support, international cooperation, working, providing social services in the communities. There's a lot of work in the parishes, so it's really local and community based. And then there's this whole network of organizations at all layers of Caritas. So overall, it's like a huge network. Actually, it's the looking at the outreach, it's the second biggest humanitarian organization in the world.
Wow.
So it's huge in that sense if you would, kind of get all the projects together. But there's also this, real sense of person to person. So I think somehow we managed, I hope, to get both that enormous outreach and that very, very personal support.
It's very difficult to have that, because it's more of a feeling rather than if you are a beneficiary, let's put it like that. Yeah. You really want to see the people who are supporting you as people, not as a service, if that makes sense. It's that human touch that sometimes is when everything is over professionalized and over complicated, it's missing. And somehow I think Caritas has that. You manage to keep that with the professionalism, the international context and everything. It does feel like human to human.
Yeah, I mean, that's the idea. But obviously that kind of human and, heartfelt support shall never be instead of professional support. So it's really, we're trying to combine the two, and that's a challenge. But we always, that's also part of the work. You were asking before what the work consists of. It's also a whole lot of possibilities for the different Caritas to build capacities, to learn from one another, to exchange, to scale up projects, and so on. So it's always about trying also to become more professional, more accountable, more sustainable, innovative. So and it looks a little bit differently at different levels, of course, and not one Caritas is the same as another, but at least that's the ambition to keep that professionalism.
That last sentence, that no Caritas is like another. I remember the first time, so it was actually the second time I've seen a Caritas activity. It was in Sofia. So the first one was in Germany. And then we had an experience with a group of people supporting people who are in short-term homelessness. Or it was a very specific project related to homeless people. And then somehow I thought that this is what Caritas does. And then when I saw your colleagues in Sofia, in Bulgaria, I was so shocked, because they were doing a candle workshop, which was supporting youngsters living in state care, in orphanages back then. And I was trying to figure out how is it possible that Caritas has so many different faces. And more or less I got the explanation you just get me. Well, this is the need here. This is what we do. And it's still the same values.
It would never come from above. Like, we are really not top down. It would never be that the international office is deciding that, this year we're focusing on Roma, or this year on disability. That would not happen. It's always about having the human person at the center and trying to see what can I do where I am in my Caritas to address the needs of the people in the most vulnerable situations, because it's always about, who is the person and the needs, what are the needs that are the most strongly felt in my context, and where I say I, but I mean where Caritas can make a change. Because sometimes there are perfect projects going on by other actors, other social service providers, and then ideally we wouldn't try to do the same. I mean, even if there's a whole issue with homelessness in one town, well, if there's an organization or a couple of organizations doing perfect work there, well, then there's no need for Caritas to duplicate that. So it's about trying to see where can we be of the best support. That's the idea.
And how do you make sure you provide, you as Maria, but also you as the European office provide the best support for your colleagues in, you said 46 countries? Because I think that it's, in a way, it's a dual reality that you have. While in Brussels, within the Europe office, you see you're involved in all of the different policy processes in Brussels, but then you have to make sure that the network is moving forward. But then each member has a different need, and so how do you make sure you can?
It's not easy.
Properly respond.
Yeah, it's not easy, and indeed, I think there is quite a big difference between those Caritases that are part of the European Union, where obviously the advocacy dimension becomes very important, and where they rely a lot on us for doing advocacy, represent them, lifting up their voice, the realities lived on the ground to the European policymakers. So, and then, of course, we are also trying to work a little bit with the Council of Europe, but that's a different, it very well, a different policy procedure, and it's not the legislative power in the same way as the European Union. So finding the right balance there, how much effort do we put on advocacy? It's not so easy. But I would say that we are kind of close to half of our offices working on advocacy. And then we have close to half now, in very round numbers, working more on institutional development, doing trainings, learning opportunities, exchange opportunities, study visits, innovation. We have what we call the Innovation Festival, where we can showcase some of the work, trying to get it known about, different works going on in different parts of the Caritas that they can learn from one another. So not everyone is involved in the same kind of work that we are doing. Some wouldn't really be engaged in advocacy. And in some countries in Europe, it's also very difficult to be engaged in advocacy. And they might actually, rely on us but not do it themselves. And then they might be more interested in other opportunities, learning opportunities, exchanges. And then we have the third part of our work, which is the humanitarian response coordination. And that wasn't an as big aspect of our work before, but the situation in Europe is changing. Now we have a war in Ukraine, close to 2 years now. And so our role in coordinating the humanitarian response on behalf of the Caritas family has become quite important, takes quite a bit of our time and efforts. The earthquake in Turkey also requires a coordinated response, to ensure that we can be as efficient as a Caritas confederation as we can, so that, it's not just one or the other Caritas is going there without proper coordination, but also ensuring that we listen in to the Caritas in these countries where there is an emergency to see what are the needs. Okay, your needs are those, and we are going to try to support bringing those to you and coordinating that. So, and some would be more engaged in that aspect of the work, some of the Caritases. So I hope that we have like an offer, so to say, that where every Caritas can feel that there is something for them in this, that is worth it. And just the fact of being here at the Brussels level, allowing all of these Caritases to link up in a very easy way, that's already worth something. And the good thing that I'm really happy about is that all of the Caritases at the national level in Europe are really engaged in one way or the other with Caritas Europa. It's not that we have like some that are not engaged at all. Everyone is, more or less engaged.
You mentioned that the humanitarian part of your work is becoming more and more to the front. And I think that that's also worth exploring a bit, because in the last, I would say, 4 years, so the 2 years of war in Ukraine, the 2 years of pandemic before that, and somewhere in the middle we had the crisis of cost of living and the energy crisis. So it feels like we are short on breath in the social sector, and we are somehow adopting a new role from being social service providers or supporters. We're becoming also first responders.
Yes.
And I think that this is professionally a huge challenge, because you generally need two different actors for that. You cannot just merge and say people, well, congratulations, there's your new hat. Now you take care of refugees, and then you also have to support people who are in poverty because of the energy crisis. So what type of actions and efforts you had these last 4 years? Let's start from the pandemic.
I really had the sense that I went from one crisis to the other, but I think that's probably also part of this reality. So I think, of course, it was a huge challenge for the people that were facing the crisis, and of course, I mean, the people. There were more and more people. That came to the number of people living in poverty, the number of people living in situations of vulnerability really increased. So the pressure on the social service providers increased a lot during these past few years. And I think on the one hand, it was the occasion to show that the social service provision is essential, that it needs to be recognized, it needs to be invested in, supported. We also use that, a lot in our advocacy work to promote more investment and support to social service providers. And, not least non-for-profit social service providers like Caritas and other organizations. But of course, it's also important that the governments don't become become dependent on us in a way which is delegating a role which is also theirs, and we are very happy to support as we can, but it then needs to be also funded. It needs to be recognized. If the social service providers hadn't been there during the pandemic, and now during the cost of living crisis and so on, I don't know what would have happened. The situation for people in very, very difficult situations would have been much worse still. And for many, the social service providers were, quite literally their lifeline during the pandemic. Now with the war, it's like crisis on crisis. The number of people arriving also with very big needs from not least Ukraine, the refugees that have arrived, ensuring that we are not playing one group against the other. It's another really important thing. The people that had needs, they still have needs in Europe, and there are more people with needs, and there are also many refugees coming from other parts of the world. So trying to ensure that reality is visible, that one crisis doesn't get the attention away from another crisis, or that's also part, I guess, of our role, and where we our role as also doing advocacy and not only service provision becomes so important. And there we rely a lot on the network as Caritas to get the lived experience from the ground up to our level, so that we can advocate for it at the European level. Ensuring that there is funding, that there is investment in social services, that there is support, but not easy. And I really don't know what is ahead. Also, the war continues.
With every guest I've had so far, we share a mix of fear and hope. Also related to the European elections, which are coming, and hopefully the new Commission, and seeing what direction they will adopt when it comes to, for example, this so promoted Green Deal, which is kind of lacking the social dimension in many cases. That on the other hand, we had the social pillar adopted, and then there are so many sub-initiatives going from that. So I think a lot of us share this fear with the unknown, and somehow hope that things will get better, because we are just stacking one crisis on top of the other, and then eventually good times will come. I mean, that's how times run, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I remain always hopeful. I don't know if it's a good thing or not, but I'm always hopeful. And I think what will be really important is to ensure that we learn from this crisis as well. I think the pandemic was a quite good example in that sense.
The only way it was a good example.
We really could see how much we are all interconnected. This invisible virus that was impacting the life of everyone, and how much we kind of depend on one another, and we need to find solutions together. And I just hope that we are really truly learning from these different crises we have been going through. I put now hope, of course, in the elections. Yes, but I think a lot will also depend on us. What keeps me hopeful is also to the fact that there are always people out there that continue to try, that continue to really show that there are other ways of doing things, there are other way of doing policies, there are other way of
approaching the crisis.
Exactly. Yeah.
I remember something now when you said the pandemic. I've forgotten so much about the pandemic, and I think it's on purpose. It was such a difficult time for me, both personally and professionally. Back then, I was director of a more on the larger side service provider supporting children with disabilities and their families. And we also had an early children intervention unit, which was generally very flexible, but we've never been that flexible. I mean, during the pandemic, we developed digital service, like all of the things we always had in mind that someday we'll do digital services and in-home calls, only online, things like that. But we never felt the urge to do that. And there was another dimension, which I think is more how the social service workers experienced the pandemic quite differently, because they were in position to support people while themselves they needed support. Yeah. And for example, in our team, it was a team back then of 65, 70 people, of which 65 or 68 were women. A lot of those women were women in their late 20s or early 30s, so they had young children with them. And during the pandemic, Bulgaria was one of the first countries to close schools, kindergartens, everything. So you can imagine these were young mothers trying to support other young mothers while they're both in the two sides of the screen juggling like home responsibilities, trying to do work from home, which in some cases is just ridiculous, especially if you have a child, or even not mentioning a child with special needs that you need to support. Yeah. So I would put it under the umbrella of it was a learning experience. And I don't think I will ever be able to forget that. But I'm not sure that, for example, the government or the different governments had the reflection of all of those lessons that the different actors learned. Yeah,
I think you are right. And indeed, I mean, I also forgot a lot about this, but indeed, I think maybe one of the things that was quite special with the pandemic and how we were sitting in front of the screens of one another was to also see the humanity of everyone. We saw the realities of one another, how we were struggling, how we were sitting there with our kids on the lap, and how we were. It also reminds of how we are just part of one same community, family, human family in that sense, and that maybe it also could help us to see that it's not always the one providing the service and the one receiving the service, but that there's also kind of mutual. We are people. We are trying to do as best we can, and
Let's leave the pandemic. It's so depressing to remember that. You've been in your position for over 5 years.
Yes.
You've met so many different people from the Caritas family, and there must be some special story that you have from all of those visits, or some inspiring journey, or some inspiring meeting that you've had. Do you want to share we need a bit of positivity after the pandemic conversation.
I mean, of course, there are so many encounters that have been shaping me and continue to shape me every day. If I should just mention some example, it's an example I often come back to because it was one of the first visits I had it was actually just before I took up the position. It was like a transition period, and I had the chance to go and visit a few of the Caritases at the national level and see some of the work. So I went to Ukraine. This was before the war, of course, or before this kind of part of the war, because of course there were also a lot of difficulties before the full-scale invasion. But then I went to visit a person who was receiving support from Caritas in Lviv. And he was probably my age, and he was living on his own. He was paraplegic. He had some accident some years back, 15 years back or so. So when he was quite young, and he had been living, he was in a situation of very big poverty, like it was a very depressing place to get to. I remember this apartment where he was lying 24/7, in his bed. He had been living, thanks to the support of his father, but then the father passed away. And the only persons he met was the persons coming from Caritas. They came every day to him. And I remember when I saw him, and I felt so, it felt really, really, really very sad, his situation. And I remember I asked him, what kind of, tell me something about the support from Caritas. I didn't really know what to ask even, so tell me something about the support you're receiving from Caritas. And I thought he would explain about the difficulties he was facing, because obviously there were a lot of difficulties. But what he said then was, thanks to Caritas, I feel hope for tomorrow, he said. And this sentence always resonates with me still, that. And I was thinking that in the most difficult situations, of course, I don't know more about him or about his life story than that. But apparently, Caritas is the only people that, at least at the time, came to visit him. And if someone like those persons coming from Caritas, if they can bring hope for tomorrow for someone, well, then that's something exceptional. And I felt like this network, if people can bring hope to other people, that's something I want to be part of. So that's the story I remember very well. Then I have heard similar stories since then as well, about people in of course, a lot of very difficult situations. Another thing that, now we're very, very close to the 2 years of the war, right? So that's why Ukraine is coming back to me. But what has also been inspiring to see is the number of refugees that have been coming to Caritas services in Ukraine or outside of Ukraine, by the way, to Caritas, and who have afterwards decided to stay as volunteers. Once they have received services, once they have been able to get somehow back on their feet after the first crisis support, humanitarian support, the number of people that have been staying because they have wanted to give back something of what they received. And this is something that I find it quite strong, and something that then I'm also thinking, well, then something must be right, in the approach, in the, these are a couple of the stories. Another person I was speaking with the other day, someone from Caritas Hungary, he was explaining to me that he has been going some, 50 times to Ukraine since the start of the war himself, driving his van and so on. And I was kind of asking, but don't you have isn't there a more logistically kind of efficient way of doing it than, driving back and forth? And he was saying, no, I mean, of course there is, but I want to meet, person to person. I want to see with my own eyes what's happening. I want to meet the people there. And of course I could do it in another way, logistic wise. There might even be more cost efficient way. I don't know. I don't even know. But the importance of ensuring that you have this human encounter, that's just a couple of stories.
Yeah, that's there's in this ugly war, I think these very beautiful human examples are staying with us, because I remember the second time I went to Lviv was to shoot a documentary with a journalist about people in institutions, people with disabilities and children in institutions who were evacuated from the west of Ukraine to the east. And then it was there's so many problems with this war, apparently the war itself, but then also a lot of the reforms within Ukraine, which were starting, for example, closing orphanages, reforming institutions to more family-oriented support services. Many of those things stopped because now the institutions that they were trying to close were becoming refugee centers for other orphanages. And it was a very chaotic time, and we went with a journalist, Miroluba Banatova, and we wanted to film different places and different people and how they are more or less. And I remember we met a woman who survived with her severely disabled son and her older daughter. And the moment that they were moved from the east, where like bombs were falling on them, their daughter starting to volunteer on the train station to support other people from their region to be relocated in the right place and to navigate this whole system. And to me, it was also very surprising because it's so difficult to be part of that from the side that you need support and just to switch and become as well the supporter. So it's there's nice, bright examples in this really ugly situation that we can, as humanity, carry with us, hopefully. Whew, okay, well, it's difficult not to talk about Ukraine and the pandemic, but I want to zoom out a bit,
right,
and leave these heavy topics behind. And it's interesting for me to see how the brain of a leader works and how you take decisions, how you prioritize when it comes to strategizing. So all of those things, and I will divide my question into 3 parts. So let's see Maria as a manager, Maria as a leader, and Maria as a strategist. How do you evaluate yourself when it comes to you as a manager? What do you do to learn to keep yourself accountable?
I hope I listen to feedback a lot. I think the communication is an essential aspect of good leadership. And I try to always take time for my colleagues, for feedback, for listening. What are their needs? I think that's really the first thing to do. Whether you take a decision, whether you try to get a sense of priorities. What is
as a leader? Because mm-hmm. I know, and I'm sure you know, there's a big difference between being a leader and being a manager. And especially when your position with the 46 countries,
yes,
they look up to you for many things, not only when it comes to policy making. So how do you make sure you're a good leader of the network?
I think it's the same, that I really try to listen, try to kind of discern what is coming out of the contributions of the different Caritases, of the different experiences. Where does it come from? Why? And then trying to see what can we as Caritas Europa do to address that, if anything. Also be able to get a sense of what is within our remit and what is not. And mm-hmm. The listening approach is something I think I apply, crossover in management, leadership, strategic priority setting. So that's I would say the most important for me. I also need, I think, that time for reflection, especially when it's about strategic planning, strategic thinking, to take a bit of discernment, mm-hmm. taking first the time to try to see what are the needs, what is coming out of the conversations, then trying to take a bit of time to discern what is our mm-hmm. role in this, and then move ahead. And that's where you need as a leader to give it a go, to be unafraid, in a sense, to dare sometimes to make difficult priorities, take difficult decisions. and sticking to the decisions, even if we will be dragged in all directions. If you have done a discernment, if you know why was a decision taken, of course you might need to also be open. And I think it's important to be open to reassess with time. Yeah, I mean, it's something I'm struggling with as well, because being able, when you are dragged in all directions, and trying to stay, look at the objective. Yeah, look at the objective. Where are we heading? And in terms of setting the strategic priorities, I think that's a lot. I mean, it's many organizations are working with this theory of change, right? But trying to look at the the end objectives and how to get there, and keep your eyes firm on them.
I'm laughing just because I've discussed it with few people in the last weeks about the theory of change and the end game. And it's very ironic that a lot of the end game for social organization is to not exist, because everything works so well.
But this is not our end objective, to not exist. No, because I think there will always be need for human, person-to-person support. So what, of course, I'm dreaming of a society where there is social justice, where there is no discrimination, et cetera, where the environment and the people live in perfect harmony. But there will always be a need for organizations such as Caritas, I believe, because we will always depend on human interaction, and we will always have our ups and downs. I mean, and that's again trying to discern the needs. The needs might be very different. There might not be people living in, unacceptable poverty. There might not be people being excluded. I mean, I hope we'll get there. You might be lonely. You might be going through a mental health issue. You might be having a disease where you just need company and support. And so I think so. It's also for us to adapt to how the situation will evolve. So my end objective is not to close down support. No.
I think that with the evolution of humanity, of course, accompanied by all of the different crises that this evolution creates, we are also having different needs, as you said. And I think that the loneliness bit I just mentioned is not a random thing. I think that in many of the countries where the poverty is not a leading problem, there is the problem of being lonely, being really alone and isolated, even though you're not struggling for the roof over your head or for money, but you're just alone. Yeah. And that will be something that a lot of services will have to focus on in the future. And
there's a lot of ethical thinking that needs to happen as well, because so that this human component, I mean, using all of the artificial intelligence, all of the technological opportunities that there are in an ethically sound way, this will be a huge challenge to ensure that we can keep the human support, because otherwise we will just be exacerbating some of these real threats, and that are already very present in our societies. People, as you say, who are lonely, isolated, more and more people facing mental health issues. So all of these situations will need to be tackled in a way that is ethical, human, sustainable.
And will be facilitated by humans, most likely, rather than AI.
Yeah, that there is, AI can be a good servant, but it's not a good master. It's
yeah. Well, look, I feel there's no better time speaking about human and human rights to remind our listeners about this amazing game called Barabar. Maybe because sometimes weird words end up coming from Sweden. This is, I think, an Arabic word, Barabar, which means togetherness. But I think that we had it in Albanian, in Bulgarian, in Turkish there is also. So it means the game, in a way, tries to bring people together. So who I have today, Bill and Melinda Gates. Wow. They're one of the 75 characters that can accompany you on your mission to save the earth. This is the game. So you face different challenges. Some of them are very abstract and very weird, like giant spider invasion, zombie apocalypse. There are others which are unfortunately too realistic. And the game was done, by the way, pre-pandemic. So there is a global pandemic is one of the...
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And there is drought, and there is oil deficiency. And so a lot of those things are not too abstract. So the idea is that you combine forces with different players who can be Einstein, Frida Kahlo, or just nowadays heroes, entrepreneurs, activists, and you gather points to fight that challenge. And it's a good family activity if you want to bring nice role models for your kids. It's also a great team building activity for human rights-based organization. And on top of it, it supports the mission of a Bulgarian NGO who is the one created the game. So
interesting.
Barabar.eu is the place to order it. It's available in Bulgarian, extremely popular language, then English. And then there's Dutch and Spanish and German. So you can find it in different ways. And I'm very happy to share that I love the game. And if you want to play it, please order it. You support their cause by getting it. Going back to the conversation. We zoomed out once from the crisis to the teamwork, and now from the teamwork we'll go to the strategic level. We met while we were both serving in the Board of Social Services Europe. Can you elaborate a bit? Can you explain your role there and maybe the function of Social Service Europe as a network? Because I think it's a very interesting union, and it deserves more light of the work that does.
Yes, Caritas is part of Social Services Europe, which is an organization of European social service provider organizations, right? So we have tried to gather the social service providers at European level. So they're representative organizations like Caritas, like ESPD or Diaconia, Fianza, EPR, etc. The idea is to try to ensure that mainly the non-for-profit social service providers, because that's mainly the members of Social Services Europe, that we as social service providers get the recognition and the support that we deserve, that there is investment in social services, funding available from the European level, that there is an understanding of the needs of the social service providers, and of course also of the people receiving the services. So ensuring high quality, accessibility, affordability, adequacy, so quality services, and that requires investment. So we are doing some joint advocacy on those topics. So really everything that's linked to social service provision advocacy, touching a bit on social economy, etc. And I think it's useful in many ways, both because of the advocacy, but also being, part of a network. I mean, I'm part of the board of directors. It's one of the several organizations that Caritas is part of, right? So it's not it's not the only platform where we have a chance to exchange, but it's very specific on social services. So I mean, as Caritas, we always try to promote the rights of the people themselves, receiving services, their dignity, and so on. But it's also equally important to ensure that the services that they receive is available, is affordable, is sustainable, and recognizing the role of non-for-profit social service providers, because we were speaking about it before, and also non-public, non-public social service providers. We were speaking about it before, how irreplaceable they have been and continue to be, have always been, but it was becoming so clear during the pandemic, during also the cost of living crisis, and that they are irreplaceable. So that's what we try to do. And it's good to have these networks as well, to not be alone in the fight. Sometimes you can be more efficient and more strategic by joining forces. Sometimes you might be more strategic and efficient by doing it on your own. It depends. So when we can join forces, we join forces.
Well, I think that's a good platform to push for different things that the social service world wants and needs. And there's many ways to do that. As you said, it's part of being a network is one of them. But I think that the most obvious thing, let's put it like that, is that being in Brussels gives you good access to the Commission and to the Parliament. And I think this is why everyone is based here, because you have not easy, but let's say easier access to policymakers. And I think that it's also interesting to see from your perspective, do you think that there's something missing when it comes to policymaking?
Yes. Yes. Well, in policymaking, I think there's very often missing the focus on the human person, human-centered policies. Not focusing, only just on the economic aspects and the growth, the eternal wish for growth and so on, but really focusing on the human person. That's way too often missing. Also looking at, more holistically, more less short-sightedness, in policies. I would really like to see a much more longer term perspectives and going beyond the mandates of the policymakers. Trying to work for sustainable change and trying to also work maybe less in kind of silos and less in isolation between the different departments of the Commission and of the other institutions. Because most of the solutions to the issues that we are facing in terms of social exclusion and so on, the areas that we are working on, they will require action at many levels. So more cooperative work, more also space for civil society, because civil society space is shrinking in many places in Europe, but we also see it even in terms of advocacy and work with European institutions. I've been involved in European organizations doing advocacy since 20 years, almost by now. And I've really seen a change, in access to policymakers, and there's this increasing fear, I think, of civil society, which is very unhealthy.
It is very unhealthy, and maybe this is a funny reflection from my side, but as a Bulgarian, this is how I'm used to being accepted. I'll be very honest. I'm used to civil society being kind of, well, you can come to the table, but you're not really invited in the same capacity as other actors are. And I think that that's something that I've seen firsthand, that it works in a really bad way, because lacking representation of citizen just leads to having less impactful policies, if I can really simplify it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's somehow a really bad direction that there was this legislation that EPP, I think,
the PIPA report,
which exactly leads to that shrinking space for civil society and for less representation.
And for a lot of, specifically targeting civil society organizations and NGOs, compared to industry and so on. So it's also, that's also very, very, very unhealthy. I'd also like to see that kind of partnership, really not just consulting with civil society, because that's what you have to do.
Anyway.
Kind of trying to integrate maybe some of the other element, but really see us, representative organizations with the wealth of experience, who are trustworthy, to see that they cannot do it without us. That's if they want to make policies that are truly responding to the needs, well, we have seen many of those needs, and we have a lot to say, and we can really be a good partner. So that's something I'd like to see a change in, and I hope also with it's a call, really to the next European Commission and next European Parliament to work with us, work with us, and it can only be for the good.
I think that there is also a very visible link between this partnership that must be there between civil society and institutions and the lack or the presence of democracy.
Exactly.
And I think that if we maybe see it through that lens, it's really obvious which is the right direction. It's not that much of a struggle to think about it.
I absolutely agree with that.
Well, you that would be, let's say, number one on your recommendation for the agenda of the Parliament. What would be then number two and number three?
So let's say, our overall cause would be very similar to the work we are doing in general. We want to ensure welcoming societies, safe societies for people coming from outside of Europe, of course, or for people who are, for refugees and migrants. That's one of the areas we are working very, very much on. Ensuring social protection, so social security systems that are viable, and the European Union has a role there. We have been calling since long for legally binding directive, so a directive on minimum income, because we have seen that it doesn't really work out with the non-binding measures in a way that is acceptable. And we really see way too many families that are not able to sustain for themselves and for their children and their families. So, that's the second thing. I already spoke about investment in social services. I'd like to mention also continued strong humanitarian support. The emergencies are many, and we need to have a European Union that ensures that there is funding available for humanitarian response and for locally led humanitarian response. I mean, Caritas is obviously an organization that is based on providing support from the local level, and because we believe that's the best way of doing it, that's the most efficient way, and the way where we can really work with the communities that are affected by the crisis. And then the peace humanitarian nexus with the international cooperation component being linked to that, because we need to ensure that after a crisis, after an emergency, there is rebuilding of communities, and that we don't abandon communities, and that we ensure that we work on that triple nexus, as we call it. That was probably more than 2 or 3, but yeah, these are.
But wow, there's a good list of tasks for the future Commission and for the Parliament.
And we stand available to work with the next European Commission and Parliament. Of course, we want to be part of that work towards social justice and sustainability.
How has your job changed you or shaped you?
It's a very big question. I think it helped me to remain hopeful. It gives me joy every day. It helps me probably also to because I have a family. Yeah, I don't know if you know, I have a big family, and I think It's been important for me also to find this kind of balance between the work and the family life. And I think with Caritas, I really feel that I'm in a space where that it's respected. The work is huge. It's not that I have a perfect work-life balance. That's not what I'm trying to say. But I feel that it's kind of, I finally found a workplace, although I had wonderful workplaces before. So, but where I really feel like kind of all of me is accepted and respected, and so it's. I think I kind of also got a sense of how essential work can be for the fulfillment of a person. I think more before got a sense that work is a necessary part of life, and hopefully a fun and a good part of life. But now I've really experienced in another way how it can be transformative for yourself, how it can really be part of your fulfillment as a person, let's say.
Great. Yeah. Well, that in a way also answers to my last question, but what makes you happy? So apart from work?
Everything doesn't make me happy either, but my family, of course, my children, and I love to sing. I sing a lot, and that's my space where I'm kind of connecting.
What do you sing?
Right now I sing in a group of contemporary music, but classical contemporary music. So basically classical music, but composed by people that most of them are still alive. Yeah. So it's a very kind of niche thing, a cappella. And that's what I'm doing right now. But I've been singing many different kind of types of music, mainly classical since my childhood. Yeah.
That's so. This Sunday, I finally overcame my stress to join a choir again.
Very good.
I was singing for the entirety of my school year. So for 12 years, I was twice a week going to a choir, and wonderful. I loved it. And I'm not good enough to be a solo singer, but I really enjoyed it. And then I've never had the dream or the idea to sing professionally, but it was such a big part of my life, and I'm missing it. And in the last month, I realized I'm missing it. So I was part of an event, of a Bulgarian cultural event, and there was this great choir, a female choir, and I went and I spoke to the conductor, and I have a meeting with her next week. So I think I'll also join.
Excellent. Yeah, go ahead. You need to have these spaces also for yourself. And I think it's becoming even more important. You realize that when you have too much, I often have the sense that I don't have the time to do anything for myself. But that's where you need to carve out the time and to come back in full force for the rest of your commitments. So keep singing. Yeah.
Wow, that's a great finishing line. Keep singing.
Yeah, keep singing.
Thank you for being with us, to all of the audience and to you. It was a great conversation. How can people support Caritas Europa? What can they do? Volunteer, donate?
They can volunteer. They can definitely donate, not necessarily to Caritas Europa, but to the Caritases in their countries. Mm-hmm. Yeah, do support the Caritas in your countries if you believe in their mission. Yes.
Well, thank you for being here once again. It was great to see you, and I hope that we have more chances to dissect the EU bubble and the policy making and all the different.
So do I.
And share singing ideas.
Sure, we'll do so. Thank you, Maya.
Thanks again for being with us. See you next week with another inspiring leader sitting next to me, enjoying great Bulgarian herbal tea. And until next week, enjoy life, hug your dog, keep singing, and see you. Thank you.
Thank you.